Darren's voice cut across the hallway before I even set my purse down. "Can you please talk to him? He's making this place impossible." The words hit first sharp, too loud for 7 in the morning. I stepped inside the living room and found him pacing near the coffee table, jaw tight, phone still lit in his hand. He didn't look at me right away. He just kept muttering, "He did it on purpose. He actually did it." I asked what happened, but he only shook his head and dragged a hand over his face. Marissa sat on the end of the couch, knees pulled together, eyes fixed on a spot near the rug. She didn't greet me. She didn't move. She just held her arms across her chest like she was bracing for impact. When I spoke her name, she whispered, "I shouldn't have gone in. I know, but I didn't expect." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Darren finally stopped pacing and pointed toward the hallway. He was lying there, out in the open, like he wanted her to see. The anger in his voice wasn't clean. It carried confusion, embarrassment, something bruised underneath. I glanced toward the bedroom doors, both closed now, both too quiet for a home that used to sound young. I'd planned to visit for breakfast, maybe take them out, hear how things were going. Instead, the air in the apartment felt stretched thin, as if one wrong word might tear it open. Lucas hadn't come out. Neither of them wanted to walk past his door, and I stood there between them, realizing I'd stepped into a mess that didn't belong to me, yet somehow still asked something of me. Marissa rose from the couch when I moved closer, but only by an inch, like her body wanted to flee while her feet stayed pinned. She rubbed her palms on her jeans and said, barely above breath, "I thought he'd be asleep. I always knock in my head. I just forget to do it with my hand." Her voice folded in on itself. She didn't look at Darren. She didn't look at me. She kept staring at that rug as if it held a safer version of the morning. Darren scoffed. "Forget. 7 times isn't forgetting." He kicked the edge of the coffee table, not hard, but enough to make the cups clink. The sound broke the room's balance. I watched Marissa flinch at it, and something in me softened despite the mess they'd made. I asked them to slow down. Darren shook his head and walked toward the kitchen, pulling open a drawer too fast. Silverware shifted loudly inside. "He told her to knock," he said. "He told her every time, and she kept pushing the door. But this was calculated." He slammed the drawer shut before I could answer. Marissa finally lifted her eyes. "I didn't mean for any of it. I walked in because I was trying to be nice." Her throat tightened around the words. "And now his version will follow me around this building. I can feel it." I could hear Lucas moving in his room, light steps, a drawer opening, a soft thud, as if he was deciding whether to face any of us. The tension spread down the hallway, each sound tracing the shape of something none of them could name yet. Lucas opened his door just enough for his voice to slip through before his face did. "I didn't set a trap," he said. The words landed flat, steady, too controlled for someone his age. Then he stepped out, barefoot, wearing a t-shirt he'd thrown on in a hurry. His eyes flicked toward Marissa for a second before settling on me as if I were the only safe surface in the room. Darren marched back from the kitchen. "You slept on top of the covers. Don't pretend you didn't plan that." His tone carried heat, but his hands were trembling in a way he didn't seem aware of. Lucas didn't move. "She walks in. Every morning. I've told her, Darren. You've told her. She keeps doing it." He gestured toward the hall with a small sweep of his fingers. "I just wanted her to understand it isn't funny." Marissa's breath caught. "I know I messed up," she whispered. "I know I should knock. I wasn't laughing at you. I just didn't think you'd—" Her voice thinned. She pressed a hand to her face like she needed to hide from her own sentence. Lucas looked at her, not unkindly. "I wasn't trying to humiliate you." He paused. "But you barged in again, and this was going to happen eventually." Darren took a step forward. "Don't twist it. You escalated. You knew she'd come in." His foot nudged a chair leg, making it scrape against the tile. The sound cut through all 3 of them, sharp and uncomfortable. I watched the 3 of them stand there, each holding a different version of the same morning, none of them knowing how to bridge it. The apartment felt smaller than usual, like the walls were inching closer, soaking in every unfinished thought. Marissa backed up until her calves touched the couch. She held the edge of a cushion, not to sit, but to steady herself. "I wasn't trying to ignore you," she said. "I really wasn't. I just got comfortable." The honesty in her voice was thin, but it was real. She looked smaller than she had a few minutes ago. Lucas crossed his arms, not defensive, just tired. "Comfortable means you knock," he said. "Comfortable doesn't mean the door stops existing." His voice didn't rise. That somehow made it heavier. Darren let out a long breath and leaned against the counter. "You made her feel unsafe," he said. "That's the part you don't get." His knuckles tapped the counter, each tap a little sharper than the last. "She walked in and froze." Lucas swallowed. "She froze because she saw something she wasn't supposed to, and she wasn't supposed to because she wasn't supposed to be in my room." The air tightened again. I stepped closer, not to take sides, but to keep the room from breaking. "Stop circling the same line," I said quietly. "You're not hearing each other anymore." Marissa blinked fast, trying to clear the blur in her eyes. "I know I crossed a boundary," she said, "but I didn't deserve that." She pulled her hands into her sleeves like she needed to disappear into fabric. Lucas nodded once. Slow. "I didn't deserve being walked in on 7 times. The silence that followed wasn't clean. It carried embarrassment, guilt, stubbornness, each of them caught inside their own version of right. No one touched the space between them. No one stepped toward the other. Downstairs, a door shut loudly, echoing through the building. The sound made all 3 glance toward the window, as if the world outside had just reminded them how small this fight looked from any other floor. Marissa wiped under her eyes with the side of her thumb, then straightened up like she needed to rebuild something in herself before anyone could see the crack. "I can't walk back into that hallway," she whispered. "Not right now." Her chest rose shallow, like she was holding her breath inside the apology she hadn't finished giving. Darren stepped toward her, placing a hand on her shoulder. She didn't lean into it. She didn't pull away either. She just stood there, stiff, as if letting him touch her meant accepting a version of the story she wasn't ready to carry. Lucas shifted his weight. "You both think I set this up," he said, "but I didn't wake up plotting anything." His voice stayed steady, but his posture held something defeated, a quiet drop in the way his shoulders angled forward. "I just didn't feel like hiding in my own room anymore." Darren exhaled sharply. This wasn't hiding, this was exposure. He pushed a loose cereal box on the counter back into line with the others, too forcefully. The cardboard corner bent with a soft crunch. "You scared her." Lucas looked at me then. "Not for rescue, just for witness. I told her, every time. Knock." I wasn't trying to hurt her. I just didn't cover up. Marissa swallowed hard. "But you knew I'd come in." The tremor in her voice didn't rise. It curled inward. "You knew." He didn't answer right away. The pause stretched long enough for the refrigerator's low hum to fill the space between them. When he finally spoke, his words were low. "I knew you don't knock. That's all." I watched the way those words hit her. Not like a blow, more like a mirror being set in front of her, one she couldn't look away from. She tucked her knees up onto the couch and hugged them, shrinking her frame until she barely took up any space. The room held its breath with her. A knock sounded at the front door, gentle, unsure. Darren looked over, confused, until a voice followed. "It's Kendra. Everything all right up there?" The building's quiet neighbor rarely surfaced this early, which told me the argument had traveled farther than anyone intended. Darren opened the door only a crack. "We're fine," he said, but his voice carried the strain of someone trying to sound grown while drowning in something messy. Kendra's eyes moved past him before he could block the view. She saw Marissa curled on the couch. She saw Lucas, rigid near the hallway. Her expression shifted. Not judgment, just concern, layered with the kind of understanding that comes from raising 3 kids and surviving their 20s. "If you're fine," she said gently, "you might want to lower the volume." The comment wasn't sharp, but Darren winced as if it grazed something tender. "Sorry," he muttered. She nodded and left without asking questions. The door clicked softly, a sound too polite for the tension inside. Marissa let out a breath she'd been holding. Lucas looked at the floor. Darren shut the door slower than he'd opened it. "That's how far this has spread," I said quietly. "It's not just between the 3 of you anymore." Marissa's voice broke the silence. "People already think I'm nosy. Now they'll think I'm—" She didn't finish. Shame filled the space where the word should have gone. Darren ran a hand through his hair and turned away from both of them, like he couldn't hold the weight of her embarrassment and his anger at the same time. Lucas stepped back toward the hallway but didn't leave. He looked trapped between standing his ground and wanting the whole morning to dissolve. No one moved closer to anyone else. The apartment felt like 4 separate islands. Marissa pulled her sleeves over her hands again, twisting the fabric until it puckered. "I didn't mean to make this place uncomfortable," she whispered. "I liked coming here." Her voice had a thin break in it, the kind that comes from realizing you might have ruined something you didn't know you valued. Lucas leaned against the wall, palms flat against the paint, as if grounding himself. "It was comfortable," he said softly, "until I kept waking up to someone in my doorway." He didn't raise his tone. The quiet honesty in his words settled heavy in the room. Darren turned back toward them, shoulders tight. "She was trying to be thoughtful," he snapped. "Bringing coffee. Being friendly." The irritation in his voice didn't mask the fear underneath, that fear of being judged by the outside world because of the people he loved. Lucas met his eyes. "Thoughtful doesn't override boundaries." He paused long enough for the stillness to sharpen. "And boundaries aren't optional." Marissa pressed a hand to her face. "I didn't think it mattered. You were always covered. You never looked bothered." The regret in her voice wasn't performative. It was small, tired, almost confused. "I should have realized." "You should have listened," Lucas said. "Just once. That's all it would have taken." The room held that truth for a moment. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic. Just a quiet acknowledgement that something preventable had been allowed to grow teeth. A chair leg shifted when Lucas moved, brushing a soft scrape across the floor. The sound made Marissa flinch, not at him but at herself. Darren swallowed hard, realization pulling at the edges of his anger. I watched them, all of them, suspended in the space between hurt and recognition. The morning light through the blinds cut thin lines across the carpet, dividing the room into small, uneven patches of shade. None of them stepped into the same one. Thomas showed up without warning, pushing the door open halfway before realizing the air inside wasn't the kind you walk into casually. He froze on the threshold, one hand still on the knob. "I heard arguing from the stairwell," he said. "Is everything?" His voice thinned when he spotted their faces. "Okay, clearly not." Darren closed his eyes like the universe had chosen the worst witness. "We don't need an audience," he muttered. Thomas didn't step inside, but he didn't leave either. His gaze moved from Lucas to Marissa, then back to Darren. "I'm not here to judge," he said softly. "Just making sure no one's throwing punches." "No one's throwing anything," Lucas replied. His tone wasn't defensive, just tired in a way that made Thomas's eyes soften. Marissa sank deeper into the couch, hiding half her face behind her knees. Thomas noticed, and his voice gentled. "You okay?" he asked her. She shook her head once, not to answer him, just trying to shake off the humiliation clinging to her skin. "I walked into his room," she murmured. "Too many times. Then I saw something I shouldn't have, and now it looks like he planned it." Thomas's brows lifted, but he didn't comment. He looked at Lucas instead. "Did you?" Lucas pushed away from the wall. No. I just stopped protecting her from her own habit. Thomas let the sentence settle, then nodded slowly. That's messy, he said, but not malicious. Darren bristled. You don't get it. Thomas's voice stayed calm. I get embarrassment. I get misunderstandings. I get two people doing small wrong things until they turn into one big wrong moment. He didn't raise his tone, but the truth in it cut through the heat in the room. Marissa blinked at him, surprised by how closely he'd named the shape of the morning. Darren looked away. Lucas's jaw eased, only a little. Thomas stepped back into the hallway. I'll be downstairs if you need me, he said. Just don't let this blow a hole through your home. The door closed behind him with a quiet click, leaving the three of them in a silence that felt deeper than before. Darren moved toward the sink, filling a glass he didn't drink from. He turned the tap off, then on again, then off, as if the sound could steady him. It didn't. You made her feel exposed, he said quietly, back still turned. And that's something I can't just overlook. Lucas's response came slower this time. She made me feel invaded. He kept his hands low by his sides, not clenched, not open, just suspended. And I've lived with that for months. Marissa curled her fingers into the couch fabric. I didn't realize it felt that way. Her voice wavered. I thought it was harmless. I thought we were friends. We are friends, Lucas said, but friends don't keep crossing the same line after being told not to. He looked at her, and there was no anger left, only something weary and honest. I shouldn't have tried to teach you a lesson, but you shouldn't have kept walking in. She dropped her forehead to her knees. I know. Darren finally turned around, glass still in his hand. So what now? His voice cracked at the edges, the question breaking open something vulnerable. How do we fix this? Because I'm sick of walking on eggshells in my own place. Lucas let out a long breath. You two talk like I'm the problem, he said, but I'm not the only one who messed up. That landed differently. It wasn't an accusation. It was a truth sitting plainly in the center of the room. Marissa lifted her head, eyes rimmed red. I'll knock, she whispered. Every time, I swear. She swallowed hard. And I'm sorry I made jokes before. I didn't think about how it felt on your end. Lucas nodded, slow but real. And I'm sorry I scared you. For the first time that morning, the three of them looked at each other instead of the floor or the walls. The tension didn't vanish, but it loosened just enough for a breath to pass through the cracks without cutting. From the hallway, a floorboard creaked, settling under the day's weight. The sound felt like the building itself exhaling. Lucas stepped away from the wall and sat at the far end of the couch, leaving a wide space between himself and Marissa. Not avoidance, just caution, the kind that comes after too many crossed lines. Marissa uncrossed her legs slowly, as if testing whether the room would shift again. It didn't. She looked at Lucas, then down at her hands. I shouldn't have treated your space like it was mine, she said. I didn't realize how entitled it made me look. Lucas shook his head gently. It wasn't just entitlement. It was habit. But habits hurt when they ignore someone else's boundaries. His voice wasn't sharp anymore, just firm, steady. Darren set the untouched glass on the counter and walked toward them. His footsteps softened as he reached the living room, as if he finally understood he couldn't stomp his way through the tension. I overreacted, he admitted. I just saw her panic and went straight to worst case. He looked at Lucas, the apology not yet spoken but forming around the edges of his face. I should have listened first. Lucas met his gaze. I should have handled it better. Marissa let out a shaky breath. We all should have, she murmured. It was 7 small mistakes and 1 big one. Darren rubbed the back of his neck. It felt like something blew open out of nowhere. It didn't, Lucas said quietly. It built. We just didn't look at it. A moment passed, gentle, fragile, unclaimed by blame. They weren't agreeing. They weren't erasing what happened. But something was shifting, the kind of shift that comes when people finally see the shape of the damage instead of just the fragments. The afternoon light changed, brushing across the floor in a warm, slanted line. It touched the leg of the coffee table, the edge of Darren's shoe, the hem of Marissa's sleeve. None of them moved out of it. For the first time all day, the apartment didn't feel like 4 islands. It felt like a room holding 3 people who finally stopped swinging and started seeing. I stepped closer to them, not to mediate, but to anchor the room. "You don't have to solve everything today," I said softly, "but you can stop tearing at the same wound." My words weren't instruction, just presence. Marissa wiped the corner of her eye with the back of her wrist. "I shouldn't have laughed," she murmured. "When he warned me before, I made it seem like his boundaries were a joke." She looked toward Lucas, the regret in her gaze clearer than any apology she'd spoken so far. "I'm sorry for that, too." Lucas nodded once. "And I shouldn't have tried to make a point with shock. I didn't think it through." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "I wasn't trying to embarrass you. I was tired of feeling disrespected." Darren sat beside Marissa, leaving just enough space for her to feel unpressed. "We're all embarrassed," he said, rubbing his palms together. "But embarrassed doesn't mean broken." For a moment, no one spoke. The quiet wasn't heavy this time. It felt like a pause that belonged to all of them. A soft tapping sound came from the window, branches brushing against the glass as the breeze picked up. The rhythm was gentle, almost rhythmic, filling the silence the way calm follows a storm. Marissa drew in a steadier breath. "I want to earn back trust," she said, "not assume it." "You can," Lucas replied, "but it starts with the door." She nodded. "It will." Darren's shoulders finally eased, not fully, not cleanly, but enough that the tension shaping him all morning began to loosen. He looked at Lucas with something closer to recognition than blame. "You matter here, too," he said. "I forgot that for a second." Lucas let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than just the morning. "We all forgot something." The room settled around those words, not as resolution but as truth, quiet, unpolished, and finally shared. Lucas rose from the couch first, not abruptly but with a slow push of his palms against his knees. "I need some air," he said. Not to escape, just to breathe without all their eyes on him. He walked toward the balcony door, his steps quiet, the kind that come after an hour of holding himself together. He paused with his hand on the handle, waiting to see if anyone would react. No one did. That seemed to steady him. Marissa watched him, not with fear now, but with something softer. Recognition, maybe, of how deeply she'd ignored the weight of her own choices. She shifted on the couch, tucking her legs beneath her, a small sign she no longer felt like an intruder in the room. "I want to fix this," she said, almost to herself. "I don't want to be the reason this place feels wrong." Darren sat forward. "You're not the only reason," he said. It wasn't comfort. It was accountability spread evenly across the table. "I should have stopped the habit sooner. I let it slide because it didn't affect me." I stepped closer to the coffee table, letting my fingers graze the rim of one of the empty cups. "Walls don't protect people," I said. "Respect does." They each absorbed it in their own way. Lucas slid the balcony door open. The track made a soft click, a clean sound that cut through the stale heaviness. Cool air drifted in, brushing through the room. Marissa closed her eyes for a second, as if the shift in temperature was the first real exhale the apartment had felt all morning. Darren looked toward Lucas. "Come back when you're ready," he said. Not an order, an invitation. Lucas nodded once and stepped outside, letting the door rest lightly behind him, not shutting it fully. The thin gap left between frame and glass carried meaning, distance, but not departure. The 3 of us inside stayed quiet, listening to the muffled hum of traffic below and the faint breeze pushing against the balcony rail. No yelling, no accusations, just the sound of a morning trying to reassemble itself. Marissa shifted upright, pulling her hair over one shoulder the way people do when they're trying to regain a sense of themselves. "I didn't realize how much space I took up here," she said quietly. "I thought being close to you both meant I could just walk through things." Her fingers traced the seam of the cushion, small movements keeping her grounded. Darren leaned back, head tilted toward the ceiling. "I should have taught you the rhythms of this place," he said, instead of assuming you'd feel them. His voice held a tired regret, not sharp, not defensive, just worn. "I felt them," she said. "I just ignored the parts that weren't convenient." That honesty made Darren lower his gaze toward her. "Thank you for saying that," he murmured. "It's more than most people would." I stepped closer to the living room doorway, folding my arms gently, not out of judgment, but out of the reflex older women have when watching a conflict soften. "You can rebuild," I said, "but only if everyone stops trying to win." Marissa nodded. "I don't want to win. I just don't want to be seen as someone who doesn't respect people." Her voice caught at the end, thin and sudden. "I didn't grow up knocking. My family never did. Doors were just suggestions." She shrugged, embarrassed by the truth. "I didn't think about how different it is here." "That makes sense," Lucas said from the balcony doorway. He hadn't re-entered fully, just leaned against the frame, arms loose at his sides. His tone was level, unforced. "But you're here now, and here the door matters." She breathed out slowly. "It will matter to me too." The apartment felt different. Still tender, still bruised, but no longer split open. The kind of quiet that formed wasn't avoidance. It was understanding beginning to line its shape. Darren looked at both of them. "We can move forward," he said, "but we need new rules, clear ones." Lucas nodded. "Knocking, always." Marissa whispered, "Always." Outside, a siren passed in the distance, the sound rising, then fading, as if even the city itself was giving them room to settle. Darren stood and walked toward the small dining table, pulling out a chair before sitting down with a heaviness that came from the kind of morning that forces you to rethink how you move through the world. He tapped his fingertips lightly against the wood, not impatient, just thinking. "We can't keep pretending this didn't happen," he said. "If we try to skip over it, it'll show up in the next argument." Lucas stepped fully back into the room, letting the balcony door close with a soft click. "I'm not trying to erase it," he replied, "but I don't want it to define how we live here." His voice stayed even, steady. He took the other chair across from Darren. Marissa shifted closer on the couch, her feet tucked beneath her. "I'll apologize to the landlord," she said quietly, "if any of this made its way to them, or to the neighbors." The shame in her voice wasn't dramatic. It was small and tired, worn down by the awareness of how far sound travels in old buildings. "You don't have to do that," Lucas said gently. "Just fix it with us." She nodded, almost relieved. "I want to." The three of them sat there, not quite forming a circle, but close enough that the room felt less fractured. I leaned a shoulder against the archway wall, watching them see each other more clearly than they had all morning. Darren reached for the glass he'd abandoned earlier and finally took a sip, as if his body had just remembered it needed something simple. "We need a system," he said. "A boundary we all agree on." Lucas nodded. "Start with the door." Marissa offered a small, earnest smile. "I'll put a sticky note on the frame if I have to." Darren let out a breath that almost counted as a laugh, small but real. Maybe we all need one. The room softened around the sound, as if it recognized the first sign of something healing. Outside, the wind shifted again, brushing the balcony railing and moving through the narrow gap under the door. It carried a faint coolness with it, something that felt like the start of calm. Lucas rested his elbows on the table, fingers interlaced loosely. I don't want to live in a place where I have to brace every morning, he said. I don't want to wake up wondering who's about to walk through my door. His voice didn't crack, but there was a fatigue behind it that made both Darren and Marissa look down for a moment. Marissa straightened her spine, wiping her palms against her jeans again. I can change that, she said. I mean it. I'll check myself before I move. I'll ask before I assume. Her eyes lifted toward him, searching not for forgiveness, but possibility. Darren leaned forward, forearms on the table, shoulders angled between them. And I'll be better at calling things out, he said. Early. I shouldn't have waited until it blew up. He tapped the rim of his glass lightly, a muted sound that broke the tension without slicing it. You're not a creep, Lucas. I shouldn't have said that to anyone. Lucas nodded, not quickly, but with a slow acceptance. I appreciate that. The room settled into a stillness that didn't feel fragile anymore. They were finally on the same plane, the same rhythm, the same understanding. No one hovered at the edges. No one braced. I stepped closer and set the smallest distance between us. Grown homes don't avoid conflict, I said softly. They survive it, and they stay honest after. None of them looked at me directly, but they absorbed it the way young people often take guidance, quietly without saying they needed it. Marissa shifted off the couch and took one of the empty chairs, closing the gap around the table. Can we talk about what happens next time I stay over? She asked. Her tone held no entitlement, just intention. Darren reached for her hand. She let him take it this time. We make new rules, he said, all three of us. Lucas exhaled. Good. A bus rumbled past outside, its low vibration trailing through the floorboards. No one flinched at the sound. No one looked toward the window. It was the first moment of the day where the outside world didn't feel like an intrusion. Inside, the morning finally began to feel like it had a way forward. Marissa leaned her forearms on the table, the posture small but deliberate. Can we set a rule that I don't go past the hallway without permission? She asked. Not just the bedroom, the whole back half of the apartment. Her voice carried a careful respect, the kind that shows up when someone finally understands the weight of their own footsteps. Lucas considered it, then nodded. That helps, he said. Not because I don't trust you, but because I need to feel like this place has edges again. Darren squeezed Marissa's hand before letting go. We can do that, he said. And if you ever need something from Lucas, you text first. She nodded quickly, relieved to have something concrete to hold on to. I will. The three of them exchanged a kind of eye contact that wasn't warm yet, but wasn't sharp either. It was the look of people relearning the shape of a shared space. I stepped around the table and adjusted a slightly crooked placemat near the edge. A small gesture, almost invisible, but it brought a sense of order back into the room. You're not rebuilding a house, I murmured. You're rebuilding trust. It takes time. Lucas rubbed the back of his neck. It's strange, he admitted. I didn't think one morning could shake everything. It wasn't one morning, Marissa said softly. It was a pile I didn't see myself adding to. She looked at him without flinching. And you reacted in a way that made that pile fall over. He breathed in slowly. That's fair. Darren leaned back, letting the chair creak beneath him. So we start fresh? Lucas nodded. Fresh with boundaries. Marissa exhaled. Fresh with respect. The hum of the refrigerator filled the quiet again, steady and low, stitching the edges of the room together. No one rushed to stand. No one tried to clean away the tension. They simply sat in it. Three young people learning that respect isn't a default, it's a practice. And from where I stood, they were finally practicing. Lucas looked toward the hallway, the one stretch of the apartment that had carried most of the morning's weight. I'll fix my part too, he said quietly. I won't make points like that again, even if I feel pushed. His tone held a hint of shame, but not the kind that crushes, more the kind that grows maturity. Marissa met his eyes. Not long, not deeply, but long enough. "Thank you," she murmured. "I know you weren't trying to hurt me. I just wish I'd understood before it got to this." There was a pause, soft, almost gentle, like the room needed that breath before shifting again. Darren stood, pushing the chair back with a muted scrape. "Let's walk the space together," he said, nodding toward the hallway. "Not to relive anything, just so we're all on the same page." Marissa hesitated. "Right now?" "Yeah," Lucas said. "Let's reset it." So they moved, not in a line, but close enough that their steps fell into the same rhythm. I followed behind them, not to interfere, but because I wanted to see them take ownership of the home they'd built, not the mess. Marissa paused at the edge of the hallway, her hand hovering inches from the first door frame. "This is where I stop," she said softly, "unless I'm invited." Lucas nodded. "And if you need me, you knock, even if I don't answer." She looked at Darren. He gave a small, encouraging nod. "Easy rule," he said, "but a good one." They moved a few steps farther. Marissa touched the wall lightly, not claiming it, not leaning on it, just acknowledging the space she had moved through too freely before. "I didn't know this meant so much," she whispered. "It does," Lucas replied. "It's where I sleep, where I feel safe." The honesty in that sentence hit her harder than anything earlier. She blinked fast and looked away. I watched them in the quiet that followed. 3 young adults realizing that boundaries aren't fences, they're care. And care isn't always soft. Sometimes it sounds like a closed door. Sometimes it feels like a hard conversation. Sometimes it's both. Darren stepped forward and placed his palm on the hallway light switch, not flipping it, just resting there. "This place needs trust," he said, "not tension." Lucas nodded. Marissa nodded. Together. For the first time since sunrise, the hallway didn't feel charged. It felt claimed by all 3. Marissa stepped back from the hallway first, her movements small, deliberate, almost ceremonial. She folded her arms, not defensively, but as if holding herself accountable. "Thank you for walking through that with me," she said quietly. "I didn't realize how much I'd blurred everything." Lucas gave a slight nod. It wasn't intentional, but it still mattered. His voice held a steadiness that hadn't been there earlier, less raw, more grounded. Darren lingered between the two of them. One hand braced on the wall as if balancing the weight of both sides. "We're going to make mistakes," he said, "but we can't let them turn into stories we tell about each other." Marissa looked down. "I already feel like people in the building think I'm something I'm not." I stepped closer, letting my hand rest lightly on the hallway shelf, a quiet anchor. "Embarrassment passes," I said. "Character stays. You fix the inside, the outside catches up." Marissa breathed out, shaky but honest. "I just hate that I became the problem." "You weren't the only problem," Lucas replied, "and you're not standing in it alone." A softness flickered across her face. Surprise first, then relief. Darren glanced toward the living room. "Let's go back in there. This hallway's going to feel different now, but the table's where we talk things out." They walked ahead of me, steps lighter than before, the kind of lightness that comes from clearing the air rather than pretending nothing happened. Back in the living room, Lucas sank into the chair he'd taken earlier. Marissa chose the seat closest to him, not too close, but no longer afraid of being near him. Darren took the space between them both, a gentle buffer rather than a barrier. "You know," Lucas said after a moment, "I didn't think you two would hear me today." He offered a faint smile, small but sincere. "I'm glad you did." Marissa mirrored it, a fragile, grateful attempt. "I'm glad you spoke." The room didn't fill with warmth exactly, but it wasn't cold anymore either. It hovered in the middle, a place where people could grow if they chose to. Outside, a door shut somewhere down the hall, just a normal building sound this time. No one stiffened at it, no one reacted. For the first time all morning, the noise around them didn't feel like a reminder of conflict. It felt like life moving on. Lucas leaned back in his chair, letting his shoulders settle in a way that suggested the tightness had finally eased its grip. "I didn't handle it right," he admitted. "I know that. I've been thinking about it since it happened. I felt disrespected and reacted with something that caused more damage than I meant." Marissa kept her gaze low, fingers tracing slow circles along her knee. "I should have respected your space from the beginning," she said. "I treated your room like another common area. I didn't even realize how careless that was." She paused. "I'm sorry for making you feel unsafe in your own home." He nodded, absorbing it. "Thank you." Darren shifted forward, elbows on his thighs, hands clasped. "We have to be honest about something," he said. "This morning looked bad, really bad, and I jumped straight into defending her without hearing you out. That wasn't fair." Lucas hesitated, then offered a tired smile. "We're all 20-something. We're not exactly pros at handling awkward mornings." Marissa let out a tiny breath that almost became a laugh, but not quite. "That's one way to put it." I moved closer to the table, the wooden floor cool beneath my feet. "You're learning something most people don't learn until much later," I said. "Respect doesn't come from liking each other. It comes from remembering each person has a world behind their door." Marissa wiped a single tear from under her left eye. Not dramatic, not lingering, just a quiet acknowledgement of her own part in the mess. "I didn't think my habits could hurt anyone," she whispered. "I just never grew up with rules around doors." Lucas softened visibly at that. "Well," he said, "welcome to a home that has them." She gave him a small smile through the emotion. "Then I'll follow them." Darren finally leaned back, releasing a long, exhausted breath. "So we're good?" he asked, scanning their faces like he didn't trust the moment to stay still unless someone confirmed it. Lucas nodded. "We're getting there." Marissa whispered, "We will." The room settled around those words, smoothing its edges, letting some warmth creep back into the spaces that had felt hostile all morning. Somewhere outside, a car horn sounded faintly, its echo bouncing off the brick of the building. But inside the apartment, everything stayed calm, the kind of calm that belongs to people who just walk through something hard and didn't walk away. Darren stood and walked to the sink again, not to hide but to move, restless energy finally giving way to something gentler. He rinsed the glass he'd been nursing all morning, the water running in a steady, quiet line. "I'm glad we talked," he said. "I didn't want this to turn into some story people kept retelling about us." Marissa nodded softly. "I don't want to be the punchline of anything," she murmured, "especially not because I didn't understand how much space I was taking." Lucas leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "You're not," he said. "You see it now. That's what matters." He paused before adding, "And I see what my reaction looked like. I'm not proud of that." A small silence fell, but this one felt like a clean page, not an echo of the morning. I stepped closer, standing just behind Lucas. "Awkward moments don't define people," I said. "How you repair them does." Darren turned off the faucet and dried his hands on a towel. "Well," he said, glancing between them, "repairs start now." Marissa sat up straighter. "Next time I stay over," she said, "I'll ask before entering any room, even the bathroom if I'm not sure." Lucas nodded. "And I'll keep communication clear, not sarcastic, not frustrated, straight." He lifted his gaze toward her. "You deserve clarity, not bitterness." She offered a quiet smile, the first expression of genuine ease since sunrise. "Thank you." The light through the balcony door shifted again, warmer now, the kind that usually arrives mid-morning but had been delayed by the storm inside the apartment. It touched the edges of their faces, softening the sharpness that had shaped the early hours. Darren walked back to the table and rested his hand on Marissa's shoulder. "Do you want to stay for lunch?" he asked. She looked between the two of them, uncertain. only if it doesn't feel weird. Lucas shrugged lightly. It doesn't have to. We just rebuilt the hallway. Lunch is nothing. A small laugh escaped her this time, quiet, shaky, but real. For the first moment all morning, they looked like three people who could share a home without tripping over resentment. I watched them, feeling the shift settle into something steady. Not perfect, not finished, but steady. Sometimes healing doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it just sits down at the same table. Marissa moved toward the kitchen, her steps careful but no longer timid. "I can help with lunch," she offered, opening a cabinet just an inch before stopping herself and glancing back at Lucas. "Is this okay?" He nodded. "Yeah, that one's fine." The simple exchange, the pause, the checking in, the respect, shifted something warm across the room. Darren noticed it too. His shoulders eased, the rigid line of his jaw softening for the first time all morning. She pulled out a pan, setting it gently on the stovetop. No clatter, no carelessness, just intention. Lucas stood and filled a pot with water, the steady stream echoing in the small kitchen like a reset of rhythm. I stepped aside to give them space, watching the three of them navigate around each other with a quiet choreography that had been missing for months. Darren leaned his hip against the counter. "You know," he said, "this could have turned into something really ugly. Some friendships don't survive mornings like this." Lucas stirred the pot with a wooden spoon. "We didn't let it," he said simply. Marissa sliced vegetables at the cutting board, each movement slow, respectful. Nothing rushed, nothing loud. "I don't want to lose this," she said. "Either of you, or this home." She placed the knife down gently. "I know boundaries aren't punishment. I just didn't understand them." "You do now," Lucas said without hesitation. She smiled softly. The room settled into a kind of peace that felt earned. Fragile, yes, but real. The kind that grows after the truth has been spoken and the dust has settled just enough for people to see each other clearly. I leaned against the doorway, watching the light shift across the countertops, catching the rim of a glass, then the curve of the pan. It was so ordinary, so human, so quiet after a morning that had nearly torn the place in two. And then, in that softened quiet, Darren said something that tied the moment together. "We're still us," he murmured. "Maybe a little scraped up, but still us." Lucas nodded. Marissa's lips trembled into a grateful smile. The hallway behind them stood open, untouched, no longer a battlefield, just a hallway again. The kitchen filled with small sounds, the soft tap of a spoon against the rim of a pot, the quiet rhythm of vegetables hitting oil, the faint hum of the refrigerator drifting beneath it all. Ordinary sounds, sounds that had felt impossible 2 hours ago. Lucas stepped aside so Marissa could reach the stove, and she murmured a quick, "Thank you," instinctively, sincerely. He nodded, not making a moment out of it, just letting it land. Darren opened the drawer for cutlery but paused before pulling it all the way, old habits breaking in real time. "Lucas," he said, "you okay if I grab this?" "Yeah," Lucas replied. "Go ahead." They all noticed the interaction, even if none of them highlighted it. Respect, small but solid, had finally started spreading through the space like morning light slipping across a floor. I watched them settle into tasks that didn't feel forced anymore. Marissa checked the pan's heat. Lucas filled glasses with water. Darren wiped crumbs from the counter. Their movements overlapped without friction, the kind of rhythm shared living spaces depend on. When the food started to simmer, Marissa looked up at Lucas. "I know we talked it through," she said softly, "but I want you to know, I really am sorry. Not just for today. For every morning, I made you feel like your room wasn't yours." Lucas held her gaze steady. "Thank you," he said, "and I'm sorry for how I handled it." She nodded, the apology finally landing where it needed to. Darren took a slow breath, as if the morning had been sitting in his lungs and was only now letting go. "We're getting somewhere," he murmured. Feels like it anyway. It does, Marissa agreed. Lucas glanced toward the hallway, then back at them. It'll get easier, he said. Now that we're actually talking. The room fell into a gentle quiet again. Not the brittle stillness from before, but a soft one, like the apartment had finally exhaled. I reached for a dish towel and smoothed it across the counter near the sink, my own small motion in their newly balanced space. They didn't see it, but they didn't need to. My presence had done what it needed. This wasn't the end of the conflict, it was the start of peace. Lucas set the glasses on the table, spacing them out with a quiet precision that hadn't been present earlier. It wasn't about perfection, it was about grounding himself, reclaiming a rhythm that belonged to calm instead of conflict. Marissa carried the pan over, the handle wrapped carefully in a folded towel. "It's hot," she warned gently, setting it down with a soft thud that didn't disturb the air. Darren grabbed plates from the cabinet, glancing at Lucas once before he placed them on the table. "You good with this?" he asked, not out of fear but respect. Lucas nodded. "Yeah, thanks for asking." That simple exchange, two young men, one question, one quiet answer, felt like the most honest moment between them all morning. Marissa filled each plate with slow, deliberate scoops, making sure not to make noise, not to rush. "I know I can't undo today," she said, her voice warm but controlled, "but I can show you I learned from it." Lucas looked at her, not suspiciously, not skeptically, just seeing her. "You already are." They sat down together, the air carrying the soft scent of sautéed vegetables and something calmer, something like relief. No one lunged for conversation. No one tried to fix the lingering awkwardness. They simply let themselves exist in the same room without the earlier noise. I moved to the sink, rinsing my hands with cool water, letting the sound blend into the soft clink of silverware. Watching them now, it was impossible not to see how far they had walked from where the morning began. Marissa picked at her food for a moment before speaking. "I don't want to be the person people talk about in whispers," she said. "I want to be someone who respects you both." "You are," Darren said quietly, "and you're showing that now." Lucas nodded. "We'll all move past this. It's not going to define us." The words eased the remaining tension, smoothing it into something manageable, something that didn't bruise when touched. Outside, a cloud shifted, letting a wider band of sunlight spill across the living room floor. It reached the edge of the table, brushing the leg of Lucas's chair, then slipping toward Marissa's foot. None of them moved away. The apartment finally felt like a home again. When the meal was nearly finished, only the sound of forks nudging against plates filled the room. No tension beneath it, no hidden meanings. Just three people sharing food after surviving something heavy. Marissa set her fork down and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm going to give you both space after this," she said. "Not because I'm scared, but because I want you to feel like this home is yours again." Her tone was steady, mature in a way she hadn't shown before. Lucas wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Space is fine," he said, "but you don't have to disappear. Just knock. Communicate. That's all." She nodded, relief settling across her features. "I will." Darren leaned back in his chair, letting the wood creak beneath him. "Today was rough," he said, "but it showed us we needed rules. And honestly, I think we're stronger for it." Lucas considered that for a moment, then gave a small, genuine smile. "Yeah," he agreed. "We are." I picked up the empty pan and carried it to the sink, letting warm water run over the cooled surface. The steam rose softly, curling around the edges of the faucet. Behind me, I could hear them clearing their plates. Small clinks, soft movements, nothing sharp. Marissa approached the door after a few minutes, her purse slung gently over her shoulder. She hesitated before opening it. "Thank you," she said, looking at both of them, "for not giving up on this morning." Lucas nodded. "Take care getting home." Darren walked her to the doorway. They exchanged a quiet hug, careful, unhurried, not to erase the morning, but to acknowledge it without letting it scar. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt still, peaceful, not empty. Lucas exhaled, long and slow, the kind of breath that marks the end of something raw. "I'm going to take a walk," he said. Darren nodded. "I'll clean up." Lucas slipped on his shoes and opened the door. Before stepping out, he paused and looked back, just for a second, just long enough for one truth to settle. "We're okay," he said softly. Then he stepped into the hallway, letting the door fall into a gentle latch. The quiet left behind was soft, even, whole. If this reminded you of moments inside your own home, you can share below.